Welcome to Read This Author's Corner. I am your host, Alice Maria, and today I am so excited to have with me author Mina Brower, the author of a fantastic series called The Daughters of Chaos. Welcome, Mina. Welcome, Mina. It's so great to have you.
Thank you so much, Alice. It's great being here.
I am so excited when you came across on my list of authors. I get these updates of authors, and I saw that you wanted to inspire other immigrant children from Mexico to follow their dreams. I'm like, I want to talk to this person. But before we get into the book and all that you are doing, I would love for you to share with the audience a little bit about the author, the lawyer, the mother, the wife. Would you share that with us?
It's a lot. Thank you, Alice. I'm so happy to be here. I immigrated here with my parents, in search of the American dream, in search of a better life. And I had the opportunity to, over time, to become a citizen, and I became a lawyer. And I think I became a lawyer because of the very early on advocacy that I had to do as we were all assimilating and learning English. Mm-hmm. My parents would have me, help them, translate documents. And it's just my story's not that unique in terms of if another immigrant hears my story, they'll probably identify. Typically, children pick up English so quickly in school, mm-hmm. and it's so much easier for kids to sort of understand a lot of, not legal, but a lot of English, writing. So my parents would have me say, what does this say? And what does this say? Or my mom mm-hmm. would take me to the store and say, can you translate it? Can you do something like this? And can you tell them that I was put in a position where I had to very quickly learn how to advocate, not only for myself, but for my family. And I think because of that, and the little team that we created, I wanted to eventually to pursue a profession where I could help a lot of people. And that led me to law. And before I got into law, I loved writing. I would stay up, many hours or wake up very early with that definitely childhood energy that a lot of kids have that we as adults don't have. But I would get up early, go to my family desktop, and I would just write these stories. And I remember even family parties at my parents' home. My mom would say, you have to come downstairs and say hello to the family. They're here or whatever, or come downstairs for dinner. And I would say no, I'm writing. So my mom would bring me up plates of food. And actually in the back of my book, when I do my acknowledgments, I actually tell my mom, hey mom, please keep bringing me food, because she still is very much in my corner supporting me. And it's, in the beginning, it was very hard for them to understand my love of writing, because I think many parents, especially immigrant parents, they love for their children to pursue law or medicine, engineering, something that seems very stable. And writing, certainly at times, the illusion of it being stable is not really perceived, especially by parents. So I think law was just one of those things where all the things that I loved came together. Okay. Advocacy, writing, and I just followed it. My parents were very happy. And then eventually, I decided that it was time for me to potentially look at this childhood love of mine, this hobby that I had. And, things happened at the right moment, and writing professionally came to me when I was actually postpartum with my child. And my postpartum therapist suggested that I potentially give writing a chance, a try. And that's what sparked all of this. And this is why we're here. So it's been a very circle moment of me coming back to this love that I had when I was a child.
Thank you for sharing that. I came here when I was 4. I'm from Jamaica, and I grew up with people saying, "What did your father say? Can you tell us what your father said?" And I'm like, I understand him quite clearly. I don't understand. So I do understand that that go between or that translator for people to like just understanding that role as being a child, but also being a bit of an advocate and just being able to follow that passion. And you share something rather personal. So this book was birthed out of a postpartum experience. Would you mind just diving into that a little bit so we can get a foundation before?
Yeah, and I think some of the female listeners, or maybe some men who have either sisters or wives, may actually identify a little bit. So I was very high risk for developing postpartum depression. And my excellent medical team identified that very quickly when they evaluated me when I was coming in very early for my pregnancy, ultrasounds and everything. And they said, "You're very high risk for postpartum depression. Let's get you some help." I was always very pro mental health, having grown up here in the United States. Unfortunately, for countries, I'm not sure if the West Indies is the same, but certainly in Mexico and other Latin American countries, especially going back to the 90s and even further back, mental health isn't really discussed. Mental health is not really real. If you tell someone that, at least maybe back then, I remember family members saying like, "Oh, like I may need a therapist," and someone in the family would say, "What, you want to go be locked up in an insane asylum?" Like that support isn't really there. So it's very interesting, having grown up here, after we immigrated, and seeing the value that a lot of people place in mental health. So when my doctors told me, "You're at risk for postpartum depression, let's get you help now," I was like, let's do it. Yeah, I was with that therapist, and she would help me, think positive thoughts and all of that, just because part of the reason why I was at risk was because I had a long history with infertility and miscarriage loss. So I was already sort of teetering on the edge of like feeling very sad and very uncertain and a lot of anxiety, a lot of very negative thoughts. So when the time came that I gave birth, which was actually like an emergency induction, and it was a whole thing. Baby is safe, very healthy, everyone is healthy. But during those moments of being postpartum, I struggled a lot with my either, self-identity as a new person, because you become a whole new person after you give birth. And also these lingering thoughts of being too happy or being too sad, and not really knowing what was the right emotion to feel after a very traumatic birth, and then my previous history with infertility. So my therapist said, why don't you just write out your feelings and write out, these thoughts of grief and loss. And I said, okay. I was actually writing a little bit before I even got pregnant, just like for fun. But with her encouragement, I was like, all right, let me just give this a shot. And I told my husband and I told my family, and I said, you know what? I think when some moms have the privilege and the opportunity to have a little me time after postpartum, which I know is not real for everyone, but some moms do. I said, instead of just maybe lying down for like 2 hours or so, or like the hour and a half that I could get so I can just relax, I think I'm going to sit down with a nice heated blanket with a nice little mocktail, and I'm just going to write. And that's how the book was born. I dedicated the me times to my mental health, but towards the book. And I didn't think that I would publish it. It was just me playing around with characters who were dealing with loss and grief and death. And yeah, so the male main character in my book, was the god of the moon and stars, has this immense grief that he's dealing with. So I will always be forever attached to him because he helped me express what I felt inside. So, yeah.
As we're getting into the book, talk to me about the genesis of like the God of the moon and the stars, how does that, because I feel like it's coming from a place historically or traditionally, where did that come from?
I minored in classic civilizations. So, and I focus on mythology. So I already have an immense love of mythology and pantheons and myths and lores and fantasy. In addition to my grandfather, who became a writer later in his life after he retired, he built a little like he shed in the backyard and just had like a little computer and would write. Which my grandmother hated, but anyways, God rest his soul. He became a writer, and he would just love talking to me specifically because I was the oldest, about his stories and space and fantasy and all of these really cool, like esoteric terms like astral traveling and traveling through the universes and dimensions and all of that. And so I think combining all of that fantastical, like myths that he would share with me, in addition to my study of, myths in school, I think it really just, I thought, why not create a fantasy realm that takes place post Earth? So the Milky Way galaxy is abandoned. People moved over to the Andromeda galaxy, so that's where the sci-fi comes in. And what would it look like to have a pantheon of gods in that environment? Because pantheons of gods, we're so used to Greek mythology, and it's like so many years ago. But what does that look like post apocalypse, post in a different galaxy? So that's where it really came to be. And I think the God of the Moon and Stars was so easy to choose because there's so many planets and celestial things that you can choose to just assign a god to. So that's really where I got creative, and I was like, all right, you're going to be the God of the moon and stars, and you're going to be the God of this. And
okay. All right. So I grew up really enjoying mythology and knowing a lot about mythology and out of it, but it's good to hear that there is mythology in different lenses. So I was really interested in the viewpoint in which you were taking your mythology, and it's like a whole nother Milky Way, a whole nother galaxy.
It's so nice when you have these larger than life characters that have very real human experiences. So you think about some of these, pantheons that we know of from history, and they're always, out conquering, and they're doing this, and they're seducing people, and they're doing all these things. But I think it's interesting, which is what I wanted from my book, to just take larger than life fantasy characters that happen to be gods and give them a very real human experience. Very real, like PTSD, a very real dealing with alcoholism, a very real, dealing with, it's very real concepts that we as humans experience. But it's interesting to see how a god goes through them.
That's quite intriguing, because you if you know anything about ancient mythology, let's put it that way, if you know anything about ancient mythology, whenever they got upset, they just destroyed everything, right?
Yeah.
So for you to take them and give them these life challenges, and actually say, no, you don't get to just destroy everything and make everybody else miserable, but give them tools to work through it, or even if they're not working through it, but giving them tools and showing them in that scenario sounds like a fantasy with a message.
Eventually it became about this message of knowing that you don't have to be perfect, because we think gods are perfect. We think these larger than life beings are perfect, but adding humanity to them makes us sort of reflect on our own life experiences, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And I think people can appreciate it with something as extraordinary as saying this person is a god, but to just see how people idolize celebrities, they tend to not see them as the human beings that they are. So it's almost as though you could replace the God with how people treat celebrities and say, listen, these, no matter who it is, there's humanity in these people, and they're fallible. They're not perfect. So yeah, I'm like listening to you. I'm like, oh boy, I'm taking this down a whole nother road right now.
And I think that's the beauty of storytelling, that first of all, we have survived as a species on storytelling. So all of us have a storytelling gene inside of us as a form of survival.
Right.
But I think the beauty of a piece of written work, or even an oral story, oral history, is that you can interpret it however you would like based on your own life experiences. Right. So someone could read my book and perhaps focus on the romance aspect of it, and then someone else can read my book and then focus on, what thinking about, their own humanity and their. So it's a book that allows people to explore whatever they would like to explore in their own lives.
And quite often what I find with books and sometimes movies is that depending on when you're reading it, you pick up on something totally different each time. Like, so this time you read it or you're talking about it, you pick up on the humanity of the characters. And then the next time you talk about it or read it, you're all into the romance and the love story of it. So let's talk about the romance and the love story. So so when you started writing this, were you trying to write a love story? Was that a main focus?
I think I always wanted to write a love story, even when I was younger, just romance. It's just such a warm and cozy genre. For this particular one, I wanted to do fantasy with romance developing naturally within a relationship. So for some of my characters, there could be what appears to be romance, but it doesn't end that way at all, because how the relationship would naturally progress. So I did and didn't set out to write a romance. I think I focused more on the fantasy aspect of it, what these characters were going through. And I was like, okay, well, if you guys get together, how would that look like? And how would that, look like realistically with someone that's dealing with PTSD and someone that's dealing with this other issue? But I had a lot of fun when characters did get into the romance, bits. It was a lot of fun. My female main character has 3 suitors who are very interested in her. And it was a lot of fun to write those scenes of her just sort of getting her moment in the sun after having a bit of a rough few years, to have this attention on her. So
yeah, I think it's always good to have 3 suitors. I like how you said that some characters are walking the path that looks like romance, but it winds up not being, which is life. So I feel like you infused it with genuine life experiences where it's like, okay, yeah, oh, wow, I thought they were going to get together.
Person, and it didn't work out, and that's it. You know what I mean? I mean, it's I sometimes, because we live in such a modern age, I have friends who, use apps for dating, and they'll say, I have a date tomorrow, and then I have a date on the weekend with a different person. And they're just sort of living their life. They are getting to know themselves, and they're getting to know other people, and what they like and what they don't like in terms of a relationship. And I think that's such a human experience. For anyone that is in the dating pool. So it was fun. It was very fun to write.
So I saw in the beginning your character has magical powers, which is not a good thing to have.
Particular universe, it's not a good thing.
So talk to me a little bit about the thought process behind creating the magic of it.
Setting it in a sci-fi setting, when you look at either sci-fi movies or sci-fi stories, typically they focus very heavily on technology. And you have these spaceships, and you have these teleportation, and you have all these things that are very science or technologically advanced. So I said, okay, well, if gods are eternal, right? No matter what religion in the real world you believe that if you believe in a deity, you believe that God is eternal, that God has existed and will always exist and is who he is, and all of that, right?
Right.
So I said, okay, well, if humans go to a different galaxy, that God, that energy, whoever they believe in, is still present. It's still alive. So what does that look like in a civilization and a human race that has evolved so much that they have left the Milky Way to Andromeda? So I said, okay, well, first of all, what does that look like? And second of all, what led these humans to leave the Milky Way galaxy? So that was where I had to think really hard, like, what would lead us to leave this galaxy? The planet would have to be probably uninhabitable. We would have to have searched other potential planets that would, host life. And I said, okay, well, what are some of the conflicts that could have resulted in a destroyed planet? So the first ones that came to mind would be, wars, fighting over potentially religion, fighting over potentially all of these conflicts. And I said, why don't we add a fun element of magic? So you have planet Earth, who in my fantasy realm was in the middle of a war where people were fighting over religion. They were fighting over magic. So this is where the fantasy aspect comes in. People were fighting over magic, fighting over religion. And then the humans in charge said, okay, we're getting the heck out of here. We're leaving. We're going to a different galaxy. And when we get there, no one is allowed to talk about religion, and no one is allowed to talk about magic. So it's almost like a parent who is on a road trip with a bunch of rowdy kids in the back. And the parent is like, I've had enough. I'm done. We're not doing this. As soon as we get out of the car, we're not doing this, and we're not doing this, and we're not doing that, and then stop.
Right.
And I was like, okay, well, if you think about fantasy stories, typically people who have magical powers have it in their lineage. Like their grandmother had magical powers, their parents had magical powers. It's typically the way the fantasy lores go. So I said, it doesn't matter what galaxy these people are. They have it in their blood. They have the magic in their blood. They just happen to be in a different galaxy. So that's really where it came about of the Andromeda galaxy prohibiting magical powers, but people still having
them.
And then you add the factor of the gods are still alive, by the way. So it's really just like a cooking up of a kettle that is ready to burst.
Right. So, it's like, just because you're not talking about it doesn't mean that stuff, they're acting like ostriches. They're sticking their head in the sand and saying, we're not going to talk about this. We're not going to do this. But all this stuff is still there. You term this series Daughters of Chaos. Talk to me a little bit about why are they Daughters of Chaos?
book focuses on the first daughter of chaos. And I sort of tease a little bit for some of the readers who are like really, really like eagle, like they have eagle eyes. And in the beginning of the book, there's a conversation between the gods, and they say, the children of this villainous god who is chaos, he's darkness. His kids are alive. So you're like, oh, okay, plural, not just the main character, but like kids as in plural. Because I wanted to create siblings that were dealing with from a villainous person, like from a villain. Mm-hmm. And that really translates to our real life, because sometimes we have family members who are not the best, and because of genetics, we inherit a lot of traits. For example, alcoholism. Alcoholism is documented to be passed down from family member to family member. It's just something genetic that happens. How do siblings in real life, how do siblings who have an alcoholic father, how do they deal with alcoholism in their everyday lives? Right. The same thing is for magic. How do you as siblings deal with this chaotic, dark magic inside of you from your villainous father? So I think it was really cool. I wanted the different siblings, which we'll meet them in the second book, how they embody and how they deal with this legacy that they've inherited from this terrible, terrible person.
Well, it sounds quite... It sounds very intriguing, and the futuristic aspect of it makes it where the lessons learned from it doesn't necessarily feel like a lesson to be learned from it, but it really...
Mm-hmm. It's almost like a reflection, I would say.
Yes. It feels to me like you've taken problem situations, challenges from the real world and put them in a fantastical world, and actually provided people with some additional tools in which to see. Because sometimes it takes something else to show you what the real picture is, right? It could be something that you're dealing with, and you're watching this show or you're reading this book, and something gets said, and you're like, oh, that hit me differently, that hit different. And that response to that, I'm like, wow, I would have never thought of handling it that way. So from that standpoint, I find that these futuristic, fantastical stories, I recently shared about Octavia Butler's The Parable of the Sower, and to think that like 30 years ago, what she wrote, some of that stuff is going on now. So it's wonderful for me to speak to the people that are using their imaginations now to project what the future could look like. So I'm so excited about what you're doing, and the fact that you're allowing your imagination to lead what the vision of the future can be. So that's really cool for me. As we are like wrapping up, what would you want people to take away from our conversation today? And what would you want people to take away from your books?
First of all, in general, a takeaway to trust in therapy and to find a therapist that works. Just because a therapist didn't work for you one time doesn't mean another therapist won't work for you. Clearly, I'm here because of therapy, and because I found a therapist that was helping me during postpartum. And then you see my characters who are dealing with PTSD, alcoholism, and all of these other things that they could probably use a therapist. So I would say, first of all, mental health is super important. Take care of yourself, take care of your body, take care of yourself like someone else would take care of you. take care of everyone else, the love and support that you provide those people in your life, do the same for you and find mental health resources. And then the second takeaway I would say is to remember that you're human and to remember that we're all living this human experience and that it's okay sometimes to not have good days. It's okay to sometimes not have it all together. You don't have to have it figured out 100% of the time. And I think that's the beauty that makes us who we are as a race, that we can all choose better every single day. Every single day is new. And if you made a mistake yesterday, that doesn't mean that you should, or that you have no other choice. You can always choose something better. So, yeah.
In other words, kind of like, don't let your mistakes define you. Allow them to teach you and help you to improve yourself. I so agree with that. It's been really wonderful talking to you about your book. And I seemingly am in this space where I'm talking to people that are talking about fantastical stories or dystopians. And so, but I think it's very important because the people that did it before, a lot of the stuff that we see in existence came from the imagination of the people that saw the future. So the fact that I'm talking to someone now that has this vision of the future, to me is amazing, because it would be really like, I would love to read your book and see in like 15 years, like, oh my goodness.
We can travel. We could now travel outside of the Milky Way galaxy, which is trillions of miles long.
Yeah, because I remember I grew up with the Jetsons, and they used to be able to talk on a TV screen, and that was like, oh my goodness, so to actually
on Zoom, and we're doing it on, yeah.
So to actually, so that's for me why these sharing the people with that type of imagination is very important, because I think it's very empowering for the audience to kind of recognize that what you see in your mind's eye today can actually materialize in the future. So thank you for writing that down and sharing your imagination with us.
Thank you for having me on and for, the opportunity to speak with you.
It was my pleasure, and forward to talking to you again as well.
Yes, absolutely. I would love to speak with you again.
Okay, thank you. I would like to say a very special thank you to Mina Brower for stopping by to speak with me today about her wonderful series, The Daughters of Chaos. Both books are available. Please pick up a copy. This has been Read This, Author's Corner. I am your host, Alice Maria. Keep reading, keep growing, and stay empowered.